Political analysts Hesbon Owila and Mark Bichachi, and political risk analyst Dismas Mokua. Morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Are you ready?
Of course.
All right, let's begin with that. And Deputy President William Ruto seems to be softening his stand with regard to the much talked about referendum to amend the Constitution after he proposed the creation and recognition of official opposition in Parliament. Speaking in Chatham House, London on Friday evening, Ruto said it wasn't proper that a leader garnering second highest number of votes had no formal constitutional role, a situation which undermines executive accountability. Listen.
It is not proper that the leader of a party garnering the second highest votes has no formal constitutional role. Elections in Kenya are close-run contests. Often enough, the winner and the runner-up achieve more than 5 million votes. The winner ascends to a formally constituted constitutional leadership role, while the runner-up becomes a virtual stranger in leadership. I have heard some suggestions, even by opposition leaders, that the national executive should be expanded to include a prime minister as well as 2 deputies as a means of addressing the winner-take-all challenge. I don't know how that is supposed to be achieved, because this suggestion has 2 problems. It does not resolve the problem, which is that we need a functional, constitutional, official opposition. And secondly, even if the positions were created, it would still be taken by the winning party. So you're not solving the problem. My suggestions are as follows. First, the national government should be reconfigured to comprise the national executive headed by the president and the official opposition headed by the leader of the party or coalition of parties whose presidential candidate wins the second highest votes. That is good for accountability. And secondly, it removes or mitigates the winner-take-all perception. The leader of the party which becomes second becomes the leader of the opposition, and with his or her running mate automatically becomes members of parliament and assume the leadership of official opposition. This formula should apply at the county level as well. I further propose that with the leader of opposition taking leadership of the opposition in parliament, the deputy president should then take over the leadership of government business in parliament. This should be replicated at the county level by deputy governors. The Senate, we must make a decision to make the Senate the upper house. Thirdly, cabinet secretaries should be ex-officio members of parliament and must attend sittings of parliament at least once a week, and whenever required to answer questions on the floor of the house. This will remove the perception that there is a disconnect between the executive and the legislature. I, however, maintain that members of cabinet should not be elected members of parliament. Fourthly, we must resolve once and for all the mechanism for the attainment of the 2/3 gender rule. We must apply ourselves to it, we must deal with it, and we must overcome it.
Deputy President William Ruto, following in the footsteps of President Uhuru Kenyatta and ODM leader Raila Odinga, addressing Chatham House in London and addressing very key issues. Gentlemen, we will try to address as much of that as possible. Let me begin with you, Dismas. So the Deputy President says Kenya will not be helped very much by the creation of a Prime Minister's position, something that has been talked about a lot in this country, that indeed that will mean the majority party will produce both the President and the Prime Minister, so it will not have political inclusion and that only the official opposition being recognized in Parliament will do that. Do you agree?
Well, in my view, what the Deputy President said makes a lot of sense, very solid thinking. Right. And it seems the case that when Dr. Ruto is not addressing public rallies, it makes a lot of sense. But in my view, the three things which missed out of his conversation, number one, he was talking about national cohesion in Kenya. In my view, you cannot have national cohesion when the economy is not performing. Right now, the economy is bleeding. There is no prosperity. That's part of the reason why people are bleeding. Then number two, the matter of IBC. Because when IBC pronounces a winner, we are actually not sure whether the person has won and the other person has lost. That is one of the key factors which compromises national cohesion. Because when somebody takes over, the nation is actually not sure whether the person is a winner or maybe, I mean, whether the election was free and fair.
All right.
And it seems to me that the Deputy President has come to the realization that there is no guarantee he's going to win in 2022. So he's creating for himself a plan B, which would be very solid. And in my view, Ruto will be a very solid opposition leader at the National Assembly or at the Senate. He'll be able to have the government of day in a solid check. But be that as it may, we need to work with Ruto because those are very solid proposals. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, there are parts of Kenya which are going to oppose those proposals. Simply they've come from Ruto. And what Ruto has indicated is what we need. We need to have an opposition leader in the National Assembly who has a shadow cabinet, which is empowered, which has got resources. Because right now what you have, cabinet secretaries who go to the National Assembly or Senate and give lectures to the members of the National Assembly and Senate. The members of the National Assembly and Senate have no capacity to grill cabinet secretaries as it is today. Okay. And having them being ex-officio members of the National Assembly makes a lot of sense. Then now the members of the National Assembly will be able to play their oversight role with a greater responsibility. But right now, the members of the cabinet say they serve at the pleasure of the president and they do whatever they deem fit. They are not answerable to anybody. They say provided President Kenyatta is happy, for them it's a walk in the park. And in my view, even if you do not like Dr. Samoei Ruto, now this is the opportunity to embrace this idea because the executive and legislature have to meet somewhere for us to be accountable. But more important, what all the leaders now need to address is the issue of economic prosperity. All right. Because in my view, that's the elephant in the room. You cannot talk about national cohesion. You cannot be telling people that we want to create new positions when Murai is sleeping on an empty stomach, when suppliers to the national government have not been paid, right, when suppliers to county governments have not been paid.
All right. Mark, a lot of people have been lobbying for the position of Prime Minister. Ruto is now saying official opposition is more important. Something that was said by, I think it was Danson Mungatana also a few months back. Which is better for this country?
Well, the fact of the matter is that all of the proponents of Prime Minister and the position of the leader of opposition are after the same thing. They're after the representation of the group of people who voted en masse for a certain candidate who lost by 1 percentage point. For example, if you have 51 and 49%. Therefore, the inclusion of a Prime Minister is the idea of having what is called an all-inclusive government, which is tricky. It is tricky for the simple reason that today as we speak, much of Uhuru Kenyatta's cabinet is not constituted of one tribe. He's got very many people. In fact, Raphael Tuju once asked, aren't I Luo enough? Because people are saying Luos are not represented. Yes, yet Tuju is Luo. So the idea of what inclusion is for the average Kenyan as far as national government is concerned, it is not that you have a member of a tribe, it's that you have a kingpin of that tribe. So, for example, what the thinking of the average Kenyan is that if you have a Kalonzo Musyoka, then Kambas are represented. You have a Joho, then you have Coast people represented. You've got, it's specific. Now, what I like about DP Ruto's idea is then it gives credence to the person who's actually done a lot of work in terms of being able to galvanize the nation to vote a certain way. Right. And that runner-up then has earned the right to form what is called a government in waiting or a shadow cabinet. What that does is it dignifies the position of those people who are opposed to the sitting government, those who are opposed to the sitting government's ideas and ideals. Now, to answer a question that Dismas has asked, the critical question, yes, indeed, is are Kenyans more prosperous now than they were 5 years ago, 10 years ago? Now, if you go to the numbers, GDP and stuff like that, the answer is yes. But the problem is that we must understand that we can either develop and be like Switzerland and Sweden, or we can develop and be like India and Brazil, and where you've got people dying in poverty while Maseratis and Lamborghinis pass next to them. The problem in Kenya is not that we are not prospering, is that our prosperity is very improportional, okay? Right. The poor are getting poorer and the rich are getting wealthier, and the problem is that none of our politicians is addressing that, and the office of Prime Minister or the office of Leader of Opposition does not guarantee us dealing with that.
All right. So Hezbon, the Deputy President says there be a leader of official opposition in Parliament, and then the Deputy President is the leader of government business. Would that almost make it a parliamentary system, or is it still a very presidential?
I think it's probably going to look like a hybrid of both a parliamentary and a presidential system. And I think for good reasons, that in Kenya, I think we still believe in, rewarding the person who is at the top, the president, with the powers, because that is the person we can hold accountable. But I think the most important thing for me is that the deputy president is not looking at a superficial solution to the winner takes it all problem. He's not looking at representation. As a matter of fact, he's looking at two critical things. That is representation and oversight. And I think having names from different tribes in different positions, whether in parliament or in the executive, does not necessarily solve the issue of representation and oversight together. It might look like we are represented when you have a Luo or a Kisi there, but I think the critical thing is, to what extent does that representation oversight the executive, so much so that the executive acts in the interest of the common man.
Are you saying that having a prime minister, or the option of prime minister, is a superficial solution to the winner takes all?
Yeah, Ben, it doesn't solve, because whichever permutation you want to use, how are you going to have the prime minister? You are definitely going to have the prime minister from the coalition or the party that gives us the president. And the moment you have that, it basically tells you that a number of people who have been calling for the creation of the position of the prime minister are just people who are not looking at constitutional frameworks within which to represent. They just want to expand the government and reward themselves with positions. But I think what the deputy president is suggesting is a lot more solid, that what you're going to have is a deputy president who is going to be substantially engaged in the development of the country at a space where there is oversight. So the issue of walking around and telling people what we've done will be a thing of the past. You'll have to be doing that in parliament. And then secondly, you're going to have the person who loses that election given a constitutional mandate to be in parliament. And I think when they're in parliament, there are two things. That if, and we know in Kenya, close to 5 million people vote for even the second person. So these 5 million Kenyans will basically be represented, and they look at the person that they gave the votes as representing their aspirations. But then this person will have an oversight mandate within parliament, in which case he will be representing them and at the same time holding the government accountable. And I think that is a framework that will attend to two things. One, the winner takes it all mentality will go away, because if you lose, then the constitution provides a framework. Then secondly, he will have a mandate to oversight, and represent his people. In which case, you will not stretch the executive. You will simply include somebody who is coming with value. Value not in terms of being given position, but value in terms of being given a constitutional framework to articulate the things that probably the people he represents are looking at. Mm-hmm. And, the deputy president went a step further and talked about replicating this at the county level, which I think is quite laudable, given that whatever we see happening at the national level, I think the situation is worse at the county level, where you have representatives who don't know that they have the powers to oversight, legislate, and represent. And what they do is that the few who understand just use that against, to sabotage the activities of the governors. All and right. I think in Kenya, many people blame the governors, and they don't want to point a finger at the MCAs. All right. But I think ultimately, yes, the direction that the deputy president is taking is quite impressive, and I must say it's giving him some clout that he needs. speaking at Chatterham House gives him an opportunity to articulate things that almost the whole world will hold him accountable for. You know, Chatterham House is not some village in Migori or Sagana. The things he said there, everyone is, the whole world is watching. And it's not just about Kenyans, and we will put him to task. And because they are good things, I think we want to celebrate that.
Kipchumba, national executive, national opposition, that is what the DP is proposing. Do you think that will improve the quality of governance?
It goes a long way, not about even the quality of governance, but look at it this way, Ben. In the last 5 years, the first term of Uhuru Kenyatta, he had a very difficult time leading this nation. Why? Because we had Raila Odinga and the other team outside there with no proper channel of airing their views. They resorted to airing it through public rallies, those all manner of
tear
outfits.
gas Mondays.
Yes, tear gas Mondays. Look at how much we lost as in the economy lost. Look at how much the number of people who died. I think we need to have a structured way whereby if the official opposition leader has a space in parliament, they can air their views through the structures that exist, and it can be even easy to do a follow-up because those ministers will be in that parliament and they can easily answer whatever is talking about. The other thing is this, when we talk about this referendum, I look at it for me as it is as if as a nation we lack something serious to talk about. We are looking for a topic to discuss because nobody so far from all these proponents of the referendum, nobody is addressing the germane issue. The germane issue is about resources.
Right.
If today I had a team telling us we want to send 70% of our money to the county, and we just remain with 30% at the center, which will be used to run the military and foreign affairs, I think I will wait, I listen to that kind of proposition. Because when we say we want inclusivity and we want to move away from one person wielding a lot of power, that can be better achieved by taking resources to the counties. Because by then, each tribe will have their god in the 47 counties and deal with their issues there. And then again, we need to work on the structures. The Deputy President raises another point, strengthening the institutional framework, both at parliamentary level and the executive. At parliamentary level, look at what we had before the new constitution. Look at the kind of parliament we had. We had the position of the official opposition leader, and there was a lot of discourse going on in our parliaments. And then the other thing is this. When we discuss about establishing the office of the official opposition leader, we must also look at the cost implication. We need to move to the point whereby we are saying, let 0.2% of the audited amount, of the last audited amount, be set aside for the office of the official opposition leader so that they can be able to have resources to even check a government. You cannot check a government by having the first seat in the row in parliament. How will you check it?
Good
you
point.
must also have, you must have good synergy with the office of the Auditor General. You must be able to be allowed some latitude to access some government information and other machineries. Because at the end of the day, a government is there to serve the people, as same as the opposition. And now that we are funding our political parties, I think that is the right direction to go.
All right. So, obviously, if such a proposal would be fronted, more details like that would come to the fore. But Hesbon, how hard or easy will it be for this proposal to be sold to the rest of the nation? Because what has been peddled around has been the creation of a prime minister's position.
Well, I don't think it would be hard because if you listen to the deputy president, I think the deputy president is among the few politicians who can articulate the same thing to a very executive and formal grouping with a lot of ease and do the same thing to a group of people in a baraza or a field somewhere. But I think the most important thing is not who articulates this. The most important thing is how then are we going to go forward with this conversation? What does having a prime minister entail? In terms of cost implications, it entails a lot more. And I think people who occupy significant spaces can easily articulate that. Then, in terms of the return on that, a lot of investment, you realize that there is very little return that you're going to get when you have a president who is, by all intent and purposes, executive, and a prime minister from the president's formation who is an executive. Then you're talking about the same thing, people who would want to do what they want to do. So there's no practical way in which we are going to oversight. And essentially, what that would mean is that people can easily declare their interest in the presidency, knowing that they can form pre-election coalitions to be appointed prime ministers. So selling this other one is fairly practical and pragmatic in the sense that anyone who understands that we are not looking at creating positions for people, and we are not just looking at addressing the winner takes it all, where anyone who loses is rewarded. We are looking at how do we channel all these aspirations that the people who voted for the person who loses and has a substantial voting bloc attended to. And you can only attend to that by creating a position of the opposition leader that is given a constitutional and a financial mandate to oversight the government. And I think it will take away jokers, because if you're going to be in the bush, you know, if you're not number two, and sometimes it could even be number two, but the substantial votes that you have don't even make you anyone substantive.
Right.
So there's a lot to be debated, but I think it is an easier sell. It's an easier sell if you look at it in terms of oversight and representation.
Mark, is it easy or hard to sell this?
It's actually pretty easy to sell. And it's easy to sell because Kenyans know and have had experience of 2 elections and how they realized that if you look at election night both times, there were parts of the country that were in mourning, and there are parts of the country that were in full dance and song both times whenever the results were counted. We are also within living memory of 2007, and we know what happened in that situation. So it's not a hard sell at all. It's in fact much easier to sell than the Prime Minister Super 5 whole coalition idea. And therefore, we must be very, very clear that what's going to happen is, whether we like it or not, the referendum is going to happen, and politicians will look for their best positions. Now, what I also like about what the Deputy President has talked about is he talked about giving the office of a Deputy President a role and a function. Because for a very long time, Deputy Governor, Deputy President have just been meandering about without necessarily a portfolio that is substantive. Giving them a role in Parliament as the leader of government business in Parliament, I think is very, very critical for 2 reasons. Number one, these are people who will carry the clout of the presidency into Parliament. These are people who will carry the clout of people who voted for this joint ticket. Right. And then these are people who carry out the functions of government, having understood what happens both in cabinet and in Parliament. So that's very critical. All right. The other thing that is very important, and Kipchumba has talked about it, is the allocation of resources and holding those resources to account. The ideal situation would be that resources go back to the counties. But there are 2 questions that we have to ask ourselves. Number one, are counties able to raise the revenues that are required for such responsibility? It is one thing to say let it come down, but it's another to be able to increase what revenues you're receiving. Many counties today, as we speak, are unable to raise the funds that their predecessors, municipal counties were able, municipal governments were able to do. Right. So we need to address that. The second thing that we need to address, if we are going to talk about devolution practically, is how do you incentivize a Nairobian to move to Mombasa? That's a key question, because development is not just going to be about roads. It's got to be about the movement of human capital. So, for example, if you go to a county like Turkana, which large populations of it are not well educated, how is Turkana ever going to be competitive against Kakamega, for example? Right. The only way it can be competitive is if they begin to control their tax regimes, their incentives for capital to move there and then be able to develop. So we need to be very careful about that conversation, because it's not just a matter of devolving funds for roads and things like that, because at some point we'll have the roads, and then where will the human capital be?
Good pointers. Let's take a quick commercial break here on Sunday edition on KTN News. When we come back, we'll continue with this conversation to take a look at these proposals by the Deputy President. Can it work at the county levels? And also the proposition to have the Senate, the upper house, and also the cabinet secretaries to be ex-officios members of Parliament. Stay with us.